November 1944, Evansville, Indiana, more than 1,000 miles from any ocean. A Navy liaison officer stands at the edge of the Ohio River, watching something that shouldn't exist. The vessel sliding down the launchway is 328 feet long, longer than a football field, 50 feet wide at the beam, displacing over 4,000 tons when fully loaded. An ocean-going warship being born in a cornfield. LST-1101 hits the water sideways, the only way to launch a ship this size into the narrow Ohio River. For a terrifying moment, the massive vessel lists violently to port, threatening to capsize before it even begins its journey. Water floods over the deck, then slowly, impossibly, the ship rights itself. The ballast system, designed to let this flat-bottomed giant cross oceans and then beach itself on enemy shores, keeps it upright. Behind the officer, the Evansville shipyard sprawls across 40 acres of what was, 18 months ago, empty riverfront. 3 shifts work around the clock. 19,000 workers at peak production. The welding torches never stop. The shipyard has its own hospital, its own cafeteria, its own police force. It's a city within a city, dedicated to a single purpose: building the impossible. The mathematics are staggering. 1 ship every 3 to 4 days. 167 LSTs launched from this yard alone, more than any other shipyard in America. And Evansville is just one of 5 Cornfield shipyards scattered across America's heartland: Seneca, Illinois; Jeffersonville, Indiana; Pittsburgh and Ambridge, Pennsylvania. Together, they've produced 660 of the 1,051 LSTs built for the war, 2/3 of the entire LST fleet, built 1,000 miles from the sea. The officer watches LST-1101 settle into the current. In a few days, Coast Guard pilots will navigate this ship down the Ohio River to Cairo, Illinois, then down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, then across the Atlantic to join the invasion fleets. The ship will carry 20 Sherman tanks, or 2,100 tons of cargo. It will run itself deliberately aground on enemy beaches. It will survive conditions that would sink conventional ships. It will be part of the largest amphibious invasions in human history. But the true miracle isn't the ship itself. It's where it was built, how it was built, by whom it was built. Bridge workers and steel fabricators who'd never seen an ocean, constructing vessels that would cross the Atlantic. Farmers' daughters welding hull plates that would face German 88mm guns at Normandy. A bridge-building company from Kansas creating an armada that would change the course of the war. If you're moved by these true stories of courage and ingenuity and think they deserve to be remembered, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. It helps us honor these unsung heroes and share more of these incredible tales. Now, the journey to this moment, this impossible shipyard building impossible ships, began 3 years earlier with a desperate British Prime Minister and a single evacuated beach. May 26, 1940, Dunkirk, France. 338,000 British and French troops evacuated across the English Channel in 9 days. A military miracle, yes, but they left everything behind: tanks, artillery, trucks, small arms, ammunition, everything an army needs to fight. Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed Parliament on June 4 and refused to sugarcoat the reality. We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations. Churchill understood what Dunkirk revealed. Britain needed vessels that could transport tanks and heavy equipment across the ocean, run directly onto enemy beaches, and unload without port facilities. The British had landing craft, small vessels that could carry infantry, but tanks required something entirely different, something that didn't exist. Within weeks of Dunkirk, Churchill sent a memo to his Minister of Supply. The language was characteristically direct. What is being done about designing and planning vessels to transport tanks across the sea for a British attack on enemy countries? These must be able to land them on the beach. The British tried converting 3 shallow-draft oil tankers from Venezuela, ships built to cross the restrictive bars of Lake Maracaibo. Bow doors and ramps were added. They became HMS Bochacero, Misoa, and Tasajera, the first landing ship's tank. But their blunt bows made them painfully slow, and they were too few. Britain needed hundreds, and British shipyards were already working at maximum capacity building destroyers, cruisers, and corvettes for the Battle of the Atlantic. August 1941, Placentia Bay, Newfoundland. President Franklin Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill met aboard the USS Augusta for the Atlantic Conference. Among the strategic discussions about the war and the future Atlantic Charter, they confirmed a critical operational requirement. Britain would build warships for the Royal Navy. America would build the landing ships, all of them. November 1941, Bureau of Ships, Washington, D.C. A British delegation arrived with specifications. The Americans needed to design an ocean-going ship capable of carrying at least 30 25-ton tanks or 500 tons of cargo. It had to cross the Atlantic in convoy. It had to deliberately beach itself. It had to retract from the beach under its own power, and America needed 200 of them immediately. John C. Niedermayer sat in his office in the Bureau of Ships Preliminary Design Branch. Born in 1893, he'd graduated from Webb Institute of Naval Architecture in 1918, worked on submarine salvage operations in the 1920s, and spent 13 years designing everything from cruisers to merchant ships. He was now the technical director responsible for preliminary ship design. When the British requirements arrived on November 4, 1941, Niedermayer made a few sketches on an envelope during his afternoon work. That evening, he went home and worked out the details in his study. The challenge was brutal. Deep-draft ships were stable at sea but couldn't reach beaches. Shallow-draft vessels could beach but weren't seaworthy. Niedermayer's solution was elegant, a massive ballast system. Fill internal tanks with seawater for ocean crossings, giving the ship a 14-foot draft aft for stability. Pump the ballast out for beach landings, raising the bow to a draft of less than 4 feet. A flat-bottomed hull would allow the ship to ground and remain upright. Twin screws and rudders, recessed to avoid grounding damage. Large bow doors that opened outward. A ramp that could deploy directly onto sand. Niedermayer's rough sketch, drawn to scale on a single sheet, was photographed and flown to Britain on November 5th. The British response came immediately: build it. By January 1942, the preliminary 280-foot design had grown to 290 feet, then to 328 feet, slightly longer than a destroyer, with a 50-foot beam. The Bureau of Ships completed detailed drawings in February. By June, construction had begun. But there was a problem, a crisis actually. America's coastal shipyards were jammed. Philadelphia, Newport News, Norfolk, Boston, every berth was occupied building aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, Liberty ships. There was no room. The LST program had the highest priority in American wartime production. Congress authorized construction in 3 separate acts. The Navy even removed an aircraft carrier from its building slip to make room for LSTs. But coastal capacity was physically exhausted. The solution was radical. Build them inland. Use heavy industry plants that had never built ships, steel fabrication yards, bridge building companies, facilities along the Ohio, Mississippi, and Illinois rivers. Yes, the rivers were narrow. Yes, bridges would need modification. Yes, the ships would have to navigate more than 1,000 miles of inland waterways to reach the Gulf. But it was the only way. The Navy established 5 primary inland shipyards. Dravo Corporation at Neville Island, Pennsylvania became the lead yard, American Bridge Company at Ambridge, Pennsylvania, Jeff Boat at Jeffersonville, Indiana, Chicago Bridge and Iron at Seneca, Illinois, and in February 1942, the Navy awarded a contract to Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron Company to construct a shipyard in Evansville, Indiana. Originally contracted for 24 ships, they would build 167. June 1942. Evansville, Indiana. Construction began on 40 acres of Ohio River waterfront. The site was a cofferdam, a temporary enclosure built in the river to create dry land for construction. Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron Company was a bridge-building firm from Leavenworth, Kansas. They'd built bridges across the Mississippi. They'd done foundation work for the San Francisco Bay Bridge. They'd never built a ship, but they knew steel. They knew welding. They knew how to fabricate massive structures. And the LST was, in many ways, less a ship than a self-propelled steel box designed to float, perfect for a bridge company. 4 months after groundbreaking, on June 25, 1942, the keel for LST-61 was laid. The yard operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 3 shifts. At peak employment, 19,213 workers. 70,000 people worked there over the war's duration. Many were women, Rosie the Riveters, who'd never held a welding torch before Pearl Harbor. Many came from surrounding farms. Few had ever seen the ocean they were building ships to cross. The first LST splashed into the Ohio River in November 1942. LST-157. Coast Guard crews maneuvered the massive vessel with stern-wheel tugboats Graco and Susan, corralling it in the current. Then began the 1,500-mile journey. Down the Ohio to Cairo, Illinois, where it meets the Mississippi. Down the Mississippi past Memphis, Vicksburg, Baton Rouge, New Orleans. Through the Delta to the Gulf of Mexico. Then to East Coast ports for final fitting, armament installation, and crew training. The journey itself was dangerous. The Ohio River averaged 981 miles from Pittsburgh to Cairo. The Mississippi ran 954 more miles to the Gulf. Narrow channels, low bridges, many had to be modified by Navy engineers to let the tall LSTs pass. Spring floods, shifting sandbars. LSTs that ran aground required dredging or refloating operations. Coast Guard ferry crews became expert river pilots, navigating vessels designed for ocean warfare through America's heartland. But the system worked. By 1944, Evansville was launching 1 LST every 3 to 4 days. The yard received the Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in Wartime Production twice. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox called the Evansville shipyard's quota higher than that of any other shipyard building LSTs. The pattern emerged across all inland yards. Dravo at Neville Island built 145 LSTs. Chicago Bridge and Iron at Seneca built 157. Jeffboat at Jeffersonville built 133. American Bridge at Ambridge built 62. Evansville led them all with 167. The ships themselves were evolving. The initial LST-1 class gave way to the refined LST-542 class. Improvements included better ventilation for the tank deck while vehicle engines were running, an elevator to move vehicles between the main deck and tank deck, enhanced armament, 2 twin 40mm gun mounts, 4 single 40mm mounts, 12 20mm guns, accommodation for 350 troops in addition to cargo, a water distillation plant for extended operations. The specifications were impressive: 328 feet overall length, 50-foot beam, draft of 3 feet 8 inches forward and 14 feet 1 inch aft when fully loaded, maximum speed of 11.5 knots, painfully slow but adequate, range of 24,000 nautical miles at 9 knots. The ship could carry 2,100 tons of cargo, 20 Sherman tanks, or 30 2.5-ton trucks, or 350 troops with equipment. Sailors developed their own terminology. Officially, LST stood for Landing Ship Tank. Unofficially, and nearly universally, crews called them Large Slow Target. Some claimed it meant Large Stationary Target. Others joked it stood for Last Ship to Tokyo, or, when grounded, Large Stranded Target. The nickname acknowledged reality. At maximum speed of 11.5 knots, LSTs were sitting ducks for enemy aircraft, submarines, and coastal batteries. But they were tough. The flat-bottomed design, blunt bow, and open tank deck made them handle like bathtubs in rough seas. They rolled prodigiously, 40 degrees in moderate swells that faster ships barely noticed. Seasickness was endemic. Sailors learned to walk at odd angles, compensating for the constant rolling motion. The ships stank of diesel oil, backed-up toilets, and vomit. They didn't even have proper names. just hull numbers, as if the Navy couldn't quite acknowledge these ungainly vessels as real warships. LST-387, LST-562, LST-742. Numbers, nothing more. But the numbers were about to prove themselves in combat. July 10, 1943, 02:45 hours, southern coast of Sicily, Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. 3,200 ships approaching the Sicilian coastline in darkness, the largest amphibious assault yet attempted. Among the invasion fleet, 74 American LSTs, carrying the heavy armor and vehicles for Lieutenant General George S. Patton's 7th Army. The weather was terrible. High winds, heavy seas. Many LSTs rolled so violently that vehicles broke their tie-downs and crashed across the tank decks. Troops were miserably seasick, but the poor weather provided unexpected benefit. Axis commanders, seeing the storm, concluded no invasion would come that night. The Allies achieved tactical surprise. At 02:45, the first LSTs hit the beaches at Scuglieti, Gela, and Licata. Bow doors opened, ramps dropped, Sherman tanks rolled directly onto Sicilian sand. No port facilities required, no cranes, no lighters, just tanks driving straight from ship to shore, exactly as Churchill had envisioned 3 years earlier. German aircraft responded quickly. Luftwaffe bombers attacked the beached LSTs, large immobile targets with doors open and ramps down. On July 11th, LST-313 took a direct hit and exploded, the first LST lost in combat. Burning ammunition cooked off. The ship was destroyed. LST-312 was badly damaged, but the invasion continued. Tanks from LST-2 rolled off the beach and immediately engaged a German counterattack, helping repulse it. The LSTs performed exactly as designed. Over the first 3 days, the Allied fleet landed 150,000 troops, 7,000 vehicles, and 300 tanks directly onto beaches. The DUWK amphibious truck, the Duck, made its combat debut, ferrying supplies from LSTs to shore. By July 22nd, Patton's forces had captured Palermo. By August 17th, Sicily was secured. The official Army assessment, LSTs were outstanding in performance and usefulness. But the true test was still ahead. September 9, 1943, Gulf of Salerno, Italy, Operation Avalanche, the invasion of mainland Italy. 90 LSTs participated. Again, German aircraft targeted the beached ships. LST-311 was beaching to unload when LST-313 nearby took devastating fire and began to burn. Soldiers and sailors forward swam through the bow doors to escape. LST-311's commander made a split-second decision. He beached his own LST stern first against LST-313's bow, allowing 80 trapped men to escape across the joined sterns. January 22, 1944. Anzio, Italy, Operation Shingle. An amphibious end run designed to bypass German defensive lines. The initial landings achieved total surprise. LSTs delivered 2 divisions, American and British, directly onto the beaches with minimal resistance. But German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring reacted quickly, surrounding the beachhead. The Anzio forces became besieged. Dependent entirely on seaborne supply, LSTs became the lifeline. They shuttled between Naples and Anzio, bringing reinforcements, ammunition, food, fuel. Each trip exposed them to German artillery, bombers, and mines. On February 16, 1944, LST-418 was torpedoed by German submarine U-230. A crewman recorded the sinking. She reared to a perpendicular position and slid slowly beneath the surface. The last thing visible was the large red circle painted on the bow with the hull number 418 in white before the ship vanished. LSTs continued the supply runs for 4 months until the Anzio breakout in May. They'd kept the beachhead alive through sheer persistence, but the pattern was clear. LSTs were vulnerable. Their slow speed, flat profile, and requirement to sit stationary while beached made them targets. 26 LSTs would be lost to enemy action during the war, but 1,025 would survive, because on June 6, 1944, the LST would face its ultimate test, D-Day, Normandy, France, Operation Overlord. 230 LSTs participated in the largest amphibious invasion in history. They crossed the English Channel in massive convoys. At Utah Beach and Omaha Beach, they delivered the armor that would break through German defenses. 19 LSTs hit Omaha Beach in the first wave, including LST 325, built at Philadelphia, carrying 59 vehicles, 30 officers, and 396 enlisted men. Omaha Beach became a nightmare. German defenses were far stronger than intelligence had indicated. Artillery, machine guns, and obstacles turned the beach into a killing ground. LSTs beached under fire, dropped their ramps, and Sherman tanks rolled into hell. Some LSTs took direct hits. Others found the beach so congested with destroyed vehicles and casualties that they couldn't unload. But the LSTs kept coming, wave after wave. When a ship was damaged, another replaced it. When the beach was blocked, Navy beachmasters cleared paths. When German artillery found the range, LST gun crews returned fire with their 40mm mounts. By June 7th, the beachheads were secure. Then came June 19, the worst storm in the English Channel in 40 years. The American Mulberry Artificial Harbor at Omaha Beach was destroyed. Ships blown into concrete caissons, breakwaters breached. For 3 days, resupply seemed impossible. The LSTs saved the operation. While fast transports couldn't approach the violent beaches, LSTs could run themselves directly aground. Their flat bottoms and ballast systems let them beach in conditions that would have destroyed conventional ships. Admiral John Leslie Hall, Jr. later argued that LSTs alone could have supplied the entire Normandy invasion without artificial harbors. Historian Stephen Ambrose wrote that Normandy proved the LST had become indispensable. In the first week after D-Day, LSTs configured as hospital ships evacuated 41,035 wounded soldiers back to England. 38 LSTs had been modified with operating rooms, ward space, and medical staff. They turned the reverse crossing into casualty evacuation routes, saving thousands of lives. August 15, 1944, Operation Dragoon, southern France. 60 LSTs supported the invasion of Provence. By now, the system was refined. Beachmasters coordinated arrivals, engineers cleared obstacles, medical teams waited aboard hospital LSTs. The tactics developed at Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Normandy had created a doctrine for amphibious warfare. But the Pacific theater would demand even more from the LSTs. June 1943, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The first LSTs arrived in the Pacific. They began the island-hopping campaign that would define the war against Japan. Rendova, Vella Lavella, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, Peleliu, Leyte Gulf. At Leyte Gulf in October 1944, LSTs delivered the forces for General Douglas MacArthur's return to the Philippines. At Iwo Jima in February 1945, LSTs beached under Mount Suribachi's shadow. At Okinawa in April 1945, LSTs faced kamikazes, and LST 808 took a torpedo in the engine room, killing 5 crew members instantly. In both theaters, the pattern was identical. LSTs delivered the forces that secured the beachheads. They supplied the armies that advanced inland. They evacuated the wounded. They carried fuel, ammunition, food, vehicles, equipment. They were derided as slow and ugly, but they were there. Every single invasion, every single operation. The LST. November 4, 1941, Bureau of Ships, Washington, D.C. John C. Niedermeyer received specifications that seemed contradictory. The ship needed to cross the Atlantic in winter storms, requiring deep draft, displacement, and seaworthiness. But it also needed to beach on shallow shores, requiring minimal draft and a flat bottom. These requirements existed in direct opposition. No ship could do both. The mathematics were brutally simple. Ocean stability required draft. The deeper a ship sits in the water, the more stable it becomes in rough seas. Conventional cargo ships drew 20 to 30 feet. Destroyers drew 18 feet, cruisers 25 feet. This draft prevented them from approaching beaches. Most beaches around the world shelved gradually, The water stayed shallow for hundreds of yards from shore. A ship needing 20 feet of water would ground hundreds of yards offshore, useless for unloading heavy vehicles. Landing craft solved this by being small and light, drawing only 3 to 4 feet. But landing craft couldn't cross oceans. They had to be transported by larger ships, then launched near the invasion beach. This meant landing craft depended on port facilities or mother ships. It made them vulnerable to enemy interference and slowed the invasion process. The requirement was unprecedented. Build a large ship capable of ocean crossings that could also run itself onto a beach. Churchill had demanded it. The British couldn't solve it. Now it fell to Niedermeyer. His solution was the ballast system. The LST would have massive internal tanks built into the hull. For ocean crossings, these tanks would be flooded with hundreds of tons of seawater. The added weight pushed the ship deeper, 14 feet draft aft, 7.5 feet forward. This gave stability in rough seas. The ship could maintain convoy speed, handle Atlantic storms, and survive the voyage. Approaching the beach, pumps would empty the ballast tanks. As thousands of gallons of seawater pumped overboard, the ship rose in the water. The forward draft decreased to less than 4 feet. The aft draft reduced to 14 feet. The flat-bottomed hull meant the ship could ground and remain upright, unlike V-hulled ships that would roll over if beached. But this created another problem. How do you get off the beach? Niedermeyer designed twin screws set in recesses to protect them from grounding. A ship beached bow first could reverse its engines, but reversing 4,000 tons of steel off sand and rocks required more than propellers, so the design included a windlass system. An anchor could be deployed seaward, then the mechanical winch would pull the ship backwards off the beach. Combined with reversing the engines and reflooding the ballast tanks, the LST could extract itself. The bow required radical design. It had to be blunt enough to incorporate large doors, but sleek enough to handle seas. Niedermeyer's compromise was a modified wedge shape. 2 doors hinged at the sides opened outward like double doors. Behind the doors, a ramp connected the tank deck to the beach. The doors could open to 14 feet width, wide enough for American tanks, British tanks, any Allied vehicle. The flat bottom solved multiple problems. It allowed beaching. It maximized cargo capacity. The entire hull became usable space. It simplified construction for inland yards unfamiliar with complex ship hull curves. But it created the ship's notorious handling characteristics. Flat bottoms don't cut through waves. They ride over them, causing violent rolling. But this was acceptable. The LST's mission wasn't to fight other ships. It was to deliver cargo. Weight calculations were critical. The ship needed to be light enough to float in shallow water, but heavy enough to remain stable. Steel plate thickness was carefully optimized. The engines were General Motors diesels, reliable, widely available, and simpler to maintain than turbines. Power was modest, 1,800 horsepower from 2 diesel engines. Top speed, 11.5 knots. But the mission didn't require speed. It required capacity, durability, and the ability to beach. The final design specifications: length 328 feet, beam 50 feet, draft loaded 14 feet 1 inch aft, 3 feet 8 inches forward, draft in landing trim, ballast tanks empty, 3 feet 9 inches forward, displacement 1,625 tons light, 4,080 tons loaded, cargo capacity 2,100 tons. Typical cargo, 20 Sherman tanks or 32.5-ton trucks or mixed vehicles. Troop capacity, 350 in addition to crew. Crew, 7 officers, 104 enlisted. Armament, 2 twin 40mm guns, 4 single 40mm guns, 12 20mm guns. Top speed, 11.5 knots. But the mission didn't require speed. It required capacity, durability, and the ability to beach. The final design specifications. Niedermeyer later recalled testing the beach landing. Navy brass asked him how fast the LST should approach the shore. His answer? Full speed, about 10 knots. They ran the test. The LST hit the beach bow first at full power. Niedermeyer remembered it was just a gradual stop. The design worked because it embraced its limitations. It wasn't trying to be a fast ship. It wasn't trying to be heavily armed. It wasn't trying to be comfortable or maneuverable. It was trying to do one thing: carry tanks from a shipyard to a beach, anywhere in the world, and deliver them directly to combat. The American Society of Naval Engineers later called Niedermeyer the father of the modern United States Navy. Over his career, he directed the design of 8,000 ships, but he always spoke with particular pride about the LST, the ungainly, ugly, slow vessel that won the war by doing the impossible, making every beach an invasion beach. And America built 1,051 of them, 2/3 in Cornfields. The Cornfield shipyards transformed American geography into strategic advantage. While coastal yards built carriers and battleships, the heartland built the invasion fleet, and the Axis powers had no intelligence indicating this was even possible. German military intelligence focused on coastal shipyards. They tracked construction at Norfolk, Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle. They estimated American naval production based on coastal capacity. They never imagined ships being built in Indiana and Illinois. Why would they? Who builds ocean-going warships 1,000 miles inland? The Mississippi River became a secret highway. German reconnaissance couldn't reach Evansville or Seneca or Jeffersonville. Spy networks watched coastal ports but never knew about the LSTs arriving from upstream. By the time German intelligence spotted LSTs at East Coast ports, they appeared to be just another type of American ship. Ugly, slow, probably unimportant. Even the voyage itself served as operational security. LSTs launched in Evansville required days to reach the Gulf. During this journey, crews conducted shakedown operations. By the time the ships reached ocean, they were already tested and ready. Coastal-built ships often had mechanical issues discovered only at sea. Inland-built LSTs had their bugs worked out before leaving American waters. The production numbers stunned even American planners. 1942, 23 LSTs launched from inland yards. 1943, 369 LSTs launched from inland yards. 1944, 252 LSTs launched from inland yards. 1945, 26 LSTs launched from inland yards. War ended in August. Total from 5 Cornfield shipyards, 670 LSTs. Dravo Corporation, Neville Island, Pennsylvania, 145. Chicago Bridge and Iron, Seneca, Illinois, 157. Jeff Boat, Jeffersonville, Indiana, 133. Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron, Evansville, Indiana, 167. American Bridge Company, Ambridge, Pennsylvania, 62. The Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron Yard at Evansville became legendary. Originally contracted for 24 ships, actually built 167, plus 13 ammunition lighters and 17 ocean-going barges, a total of 197 vessels. Peak production, 1 ship every 3 to 4 days. The yard received the Army-Navy E Award twice, once with 1 star, once with 2 stars, recognizing sustained excellence in production. The workers came from everywhere: farmers from surrounding counties, women who'd worked in department stores, teenagers just out of high school. Many had never seen an ocean. Some had never left Indiana, but they could weld, they could rivet, they could read blueprints, and they understood that their work mattered. The yard operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Night shift workers arrived at dusk, day shift left at dawn. The welding torches never went dark. The sound of riveting hammers never stopped. Locals could set their watches by the shift changes, thousands of workers streaming through the gates like clockwork. Accidents happened. Industrial work is dangerous. Heavy equipment, hot metal, fatigue from long shifts. The yard maintained its own hospital. Safety officers patrolled constantly, but the work continued because men were dying on beaches in Sicily and Normandy and Iwo Jima, and those men needed tanks, and tanks needed ships, and ships needed welders. Women comprised a significant portion of the workforce. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just propaganda, she was real, working third shift at Evansville Shipyard, welding hull plates that would face German artillery at Anzio. The yard employed women as welders, fitters, electricians, painters. Some became supervisors. Most had never worked in heavy industry. Many discovered they were skilled at it. The racial dynamics were complex. African Americans worked in the yards but faced discrimination, separate facilities in some areas, limited opportunities for advancement. But the labor shortage created openings that peacetime would have denied, and the work itself was egalitarian. A weld either held or it didn't, regardless of who made it. The community embraced the shipyard. When ships launched, residents lined the levee at Sunset Park and Dress Plaza to watch. Some climbed on rooftops for better views. Launch ceremonies were civic events. A local woman sponsored each ship, christening it with champagne as it slid into the Ohio River. The entire city felt invested. The Red Cross operated a canteen at the Evansville train station. It served 1.6 million service members during the war, an average of 1,500 per day. Food donated by churches, businesses, and farmers, volunteers working around the clock. Because Evansville was a transit hub, troops passing through, LST crews arriving for training, Navy personnel moving between assignments. By February 1945, when the last Evansville-built LST launched, the yard had produced 167 LSTs, 13 ammunition lighters, 17 ocean-going barges, total displacement over 670,000 tons of shipping, total value over $300 million 1945 dollars. The yard shut down in December 1945. The last ship departed. The workers went home. In January 1946, a fire swept through the facility. Some structures were destroyed, the rest were demolished. Today, nothing remains. The site is a parking lot. But when the Ohio River level drops, the launchways are still visible, concrete ramps leading to the water where 167 ships began their journey to war. Other inland yards had similar stories. At Seneca, Illinois, Chicago Bridge and Iron built 157 LSTs on the Illinois River. The town's pre-war population was 1,200. During the war, 12,000 workers commuted there daily. At Jeffboat in Jeffersonville, Indiana, across the river from Louisville, Kentucky, the yard launched 133 LSTs. At Neville Island, Pennsylvania, just downriver from Pittsburgh, Dravo built 145. Together, these yards, these cornfield shipyards that shouldn't have existed, produced 2/3 of the LST fleet. They built the ships that opened Second Front in Europe. They built the invasion fleet for D-Day. They built the vessels that island-hopped across the Pacific. And the enemy never saw it coming, because who builds a navy in a cornfield? The final statistics tell the story of industrial mobilization on a scale never before attempted. Total American LST production, 1,051 ships. Built at coastal yards, 381. Built at inland yards, 670. Major coastal yards, Newport News Shipbuilding, Virginia, 18. Bethlehem, Hingham, Massachusetts, 98. Bethlehem Steel, Quincy, Massachusetts, 22. Norfolk Navy Yard, Virginia, 19. Boston Navy Yard, Massachusetts, 47. Other coastal yards, 177. The inland yard's dominance is stark. 64% of all American LSTs came from 5 facilities that hadn't existed before the war, built by companies that had never constructed ships, staffed by workers who'd never seen an ocean. LST variants and modifications. LST-1 class, original British design, largely abandoned, 3 constructed. LST-542 class, standard American design, 1,048 constructed. Specialized modifications, LST-H, hospital ships, 38 converted. LST-R, rocket ships, 12 converted. LST-RH, repair ships, 39 converted. Railroad-equipped LSTs, several, for carrying loaded freight cars. Combat losses, 26 LSTs sunk by enemy action, 13 lost to weather or accident. Total losses, 39 of 1,051, a 96% survival rate. Construction timeline, First keel laid June 10, 1942, Dravo, Pittsburgh. First LST commissioned October 27, 1942, LST-383, Newport News. Peak production 1943 to 1944, averaging 30 to 35 LSTs per month. Final LST completed 1945. Combat operations, European theater, Operation Husky, Sicily, 74 American LSTs, July 1943. Operation Avalanche, Salerno, 90 LSTs, September 1943. Operation Shingle, Anzio, sustained operations, January to May 1944. Operation Overlord, Normandy, 230 LSTs, June 1944. Operation Dragoon, Southern France, 60 LSTs, August 1944. Pacific Theater, Solomon Islands, June 1943 onward. Gilbert Islands, Tarawa, November 1943. Marshall Islands, January to February 1944. Marianas, Saipan, Guam, June to July 1944. Philippines, Leyte Gulf, October 1944. Iwo Jima, February 1945. Okinawa, April to June 1945. Cargo delivered. Impossible to calculate precisely, but LSTs delivered millions of tons of equipment, vehicles, supplies, and troops. They participated in every major Allied amphibious operation 1943 to 1945. Personnel. Each LST carried a crew of approximately 111, 7 officers, 104 enlisted. Total LST crew personnel over the war, roughly 120,000 sailors, considering rotations and replacements. Wounded evacuated. At least 100,000 casualties evacuated by LST hospital ships during the war. Post-war service. LSTs continued serving through the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, and Vietnam War, 1965 to 1973. Some remained in service into the 1990s. Foreign navies operated LSTs for decades. The basic design proved so effective that modified versions are still built today. The Cornfield shipyards shut down after the war. Workers returned to farms, factories, and peacetime lives. But for 3 years, America's heartland became its secret weapon. December 12, 1945, Evansville, Indiana. The last LST slides down the launchway into the Ohio River. LST 1114. The final ship from the final inland yard. The yard is already winding down. Most workers have left. The cafeteria is closed. The hospital is empty. In a few weeks, a fire will sweep through the facility, destroying what remains. But LST 1114 sits in the current, ready for its journey. Down the Ohio, down the Mississippi, to the Gulf, then the Atlantic. But the war is over. This ship will never beach under fire, never carry Marines to hostile shores, never evacuate wounded soldiers. It will serve in training, in reserve, perhaps eventually in Korea, but its war ended before it began. Yet LST 1114 represents something larger than one ship. It represents the industrial miracle that won World War II. Not just the ships themselves, but where they were built, how they were built, by whom they were built. The Germans built U-boats to cut Allied supply lines. The Japanese built battleships to dominate the Pacific. America built LSTs in cornfields 1,000 miles from the sea. And when British, American, and Canadian troops hit the beaches at Normandy, they rode ships built by farmers' daughters who'd never seen an ocean. When Marines stormed Iwo Jima, they arrived on vessels welded by bridge workers from Kansas who'd never built a ship. The strategic advantage wasn't just production volume, it was production invisibility. Axis intelligence tracked coastal shipyards. They never knew about Evansville, Seneca, Jeffersonville, Neville Island, Ambridge. By the time German reconnaissance spotted LSTs at coastal ports, they appeared suddenly, as if from nowhere. 670 ships built in secret, in plain sight, in places the enemy couldn't imagine ships being built. John C. Niedermeyer, who sketched the LST design on an envelope in a few afternoon hours, received the Navy Distinguished Civilian Service Award in 1945. He retired in 1958 after directing the design of 8,000 ships. He died in 1982, having witnessed his ugly duckling design serve through 3 wars and transform amphibious warfare forever. The LST proved a simple truth. Wars are won not just by brilliant strategies or brave soldiers, but by nations that can deliver overwhelming force to the point of decision. And delivery requires logistics. Logistics require ships. Ships require shipyards. And sometimes shipyards require cornfields. Today, USS LST-325 is docked in Evansville, the only fully operational World War II LST remaining. It serves as a museum ship, though it wasn't built there. LST-325 came from Philadelphia, but Evansville earned the honor of hosting it. Because Evansville built 167 of its sisters, because Evansville was the heart of the Cornfield Navy, because Evansville proved that America's military strength came not from its coasts, but from its heartland. The LST was never beautiful, it was never fast, it was never loved by the sailors who served on it, but it was there, at every invasion, every landing, every beach. Built in a cornfield, proven on the world's shores.